So my name is James Stangland. I am in the Brito Lab. I am a first-year PhD. And for some of you that are coming from Montana State University, I got my undergrad in Montana State University.
I can go next.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, sorry. You want to go, Mariella?
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Don Romano. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm a first-year PhD student in Stephen 80's lab, so I'm a basement dweller. And one student actually is coming from Hofstra, so I also went to Hofstra University for undergrad.
And I'm Mariella. I'm a third-year PhD student at Dr. David Putnam's lab. I work at the first, it's Weil Hall South, like in the first floor in Weil Hall. So I'm kind of next door to Adrian, like now he'll say. And I did my undergrad at the University of Puerto Rico. I don't know. I think in this group there's nobody from Puerto Rico. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm Adrian. I'm in Claudia Fishbach's group. I'm a fifth year, so I'm the old one here. And I did my undergrad at University of Utah. So if anybody wants to know that lovely transition, I can provide that as well.
Good.
So are there questions or?
So why don't we start off with like just saying, like talking about our typical day, like as a grad student. How about we go with that? So I'll start with that. So typically for me during just weekdays, like when I have work to do, basically like I just come and do like the work, especially during COVID times. Like I'm here today for just a couple hours today, but basically how the day normally goes for me is that I'll come in, do the work that I need to do in the lab. If there's any computer work I need to do, I'll do that. But normally my day is like a typical like 9 to 5, basically. But I still have like lunch breaks and breaks throughout the day to do whatever I feel like doing. But yeah, like in general, like there's a lot like you work typical hours basically, but I'm also a fifth year, so I can more talk about the later stages than the early stages at this point, because that's more of a blur.
Yeah, so for me, typical day, I go to a lab pretty often, but I don't usually go like 9 to 5. I don't like getting up early. So I usually like roll that a couple hours. So I end up going like 11 to 7, like noon to 8, like that sort of hours. And like that works better for me. So it's pretty good. Like grad school, like depending on the PI, or probably all the PIs, they don't really manage of like, oh, you have to be in the lab a certain number of hours, or you have to be in lab at 8 or 9. So like as long as you get like the work done, like in the way you want to get it done, then it's done. Then it's pretty fine. I do work on weekends pretty often. I work less hard on weekends, or on the weekends that I do work hard, I usually go like, okay, I'll take like a Wednesday or a Thursday semi off. But yeah, those are basically how I work, like the hours ish I work as.
Yeah, for me, usually it's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. My PI doesn't really expect me to like have to come in on the weekends, but there are sometimes experiments just happen and you have to come in on the weekends to check up on a cell culture or check up on a mouse. So that kind of happens. But mostly it's 9 to 5 with breaks. It's not much, past what you would normally expect to work in, just any normal job.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I'm actually more on the side of Mariella. I kind of like a little bit later start to my day, so I'm more say like 10 to 6, 11 to 7. I do enjoy breaks. I work best with these kinds of breaks, but you hear from everyone, as long as you get the work done and you have results for your PI, they're not really going to care, in what time frame you do it. They'll just care about what you've done this week. And so for me, I can work on weekends, but I don't have to come into the lab as much since I do a little bit more computational work. So it will also depend on if you do more theoretical stuff, you can do your work more from anywhere versus having to come to the lab.
And I think I saw a question. How do you manage classes with lab time? I think in my first semester, I took just stats and drug delivery, and I would not recommend taking more than 2 classes because I feel like once you get to grad school, like you like your ability to take classes just plummets. You don't want to sit in class, and you definitely don't want to do like homework or like extra reading once you're in grad school. So at most take like 2 classes and really like just 1 class and one that's like stats or something that's more like general or basic. And yeah, like it's just since the classes are pretty static, you just have to like work lab time around that. But and try to take like the classes, like only take classes that are gonna like help you, like they're gonna help you with your project. Like you don't really have time to take. Oh, I'm gonna take this class because it sounds interesting because you have like their research to do. But at least that means that you don't have to take many classes then.
Yeah, it's a good question, especially in your first semester. You're going to be doing many rotations and trying to find a home that you could place in for the rest of your PhD. So from other advice that I've gotten, yeah, 2 classes max is probably good. I mean, I know I threw myself to the wolves. I took solid mechanics and an applied math class, and those are definitely hell, but I got in somewhere and you can do it. But the professors as well will understand that if you've got research to do, they'll take care of you if you're doing what you need to do. Your main priority is getting into a lab and doing the work and not as much getting an A anymore. So it's another thing you'll have to take into account, not just for your first semester, but in the semesters onward. So yeah, if anyone else has some comments, please.
Yeah, I don't think there's much more for me to add, but I will address the next question, which is how many years do you take classes for? It's typically your first 2 years, quite honestly, but you can take classes beyond that if you feel like taking a class here and there. So like, for example, last semester, I took a machine learning class because some of my data was actually looking like it would be useful to learn machine learning. So I took a class on that to get an idea of how my data and my project could use that kind of thing. But in general, it's like your first year, 2 years is all the amount of time that you take classes for. But it really just depends on like, can you balance that kind of thing? Because again, like as has been reiterated before, like you're here to do more on the research side than take classes at this point. Yeah.
Do you guys have any recommendations for classes to take in the first semester that are more like broad and can be applicable to multiple areas of research?
Stats is a good one. That one's
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Marielle.
No, I was interrupting you. Sorry. I was going to say that I took stats because my stats in undergrad was kind of weak. But I feel like at least stats 1 is more like how to learn how to use R, which like if you want to learn how to use R is pretty good. And I have used R for a couple things. I think stats, the second part of that stats class might be more related to research stuff, but I don't know for sure. And I think I learned the rest of it like through doing research. But if you're coming completely new to stats, or like if your stats in undergrad was pretty weak, then it's probably good. If you have taken stats already, it's probably not going to be super helpful, but yeah, or if you do want to learn like how to use R and the basics of that, that's also a pretty useful class.
Yeah, in general, when it comes to taking classes, my advice is talk to the students that are in the labs you're interested in. They'll give you a good idea of like which ones are extremely useful and expected to take at some point, because it's going to be very dependent on like what research you end up doing, which classes, one, excite you, but two, also are going to be relevant for your work that you need to do. So it looks like we have another question in the chat as well. So have any of us participated in the Ivy Plus Exchange Scholar Program to take courses or conduct dissertation research? I have not. Anybody else? I actually have not heard of this, so I will be honest.
Yeah, I've not either, so I have no idea.
Nope.
I don't know, Jan, if you maybe know a little bit more, would want to elaborate on that, because I definitely didn't know of this kind of a program.
I have to say that I have not heard of this program either. I'm doing a quick little search on it. It does look like Cornell does participate, so that's a good thing. It is an application process. Let us do some digging, and we can respond offline with this question. This is a good question. It could be a new program. Haven't had this one yet. I failed the interview. There's another question in the chat about housing.
Yeah, so we got two questions. Let's tackle the first one first and then go into the housing aspect. So the next question is, what's one piece of advice you know now that you wish you knew coming into Cornell for grad school? I'll let James start off since it sounded like he was getting ready to answer that.
Yeah, I guess one thing I would say for advice is like, definitely make sure you allocate your time wisely and try not to stretch yourself too thin. I did that in my first semester. I was trying to do 2 rotations and 2 classes all at the same time, and it was definitely kind of a headache, actually. So know your limitations and don't stretch yourself too thin on the first semester.
Yeah, definitely to build off of what James said, know your limitations and really learn to balance and learn where you're going to spend most of your time. Do not feel guilty about focusing more on your rotations than on your classes. It is a-okay. It is a very weird thing to do at first because we're used to doing very well in classes, but like you will be surprised at how much you still will get out of the classes if you just participate and then even try and just apply it to your research and asking questions to your PIs. And even in some things that I would do too at the colloquiums, I would just try to ask questions based off of what I learned.
Yeah, it's important to remember that like you're still here like studying and learning, like you're a PhD student. So you're not coming in already expected to know things. You're still like expected to learn and like develop your project and grow out of that. So definitely like if you don't know something, like don't think, oh, I'm stupid, or like, oh, I should know this already. Like take it as a chance of like, oh, like then I can learn this and then I can be able to apply it and use it for whatever I need that's related to like my research.
Yeah, and sort of building on all of those points, the one thing that like I highly emphasize now that I know a lot more after 4 full years and now 4.5 at this point, I guess, be open to change, be very flexible, like don't come in like with like just a set, like this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm going to do it. Like things will not work. Things that you think you find interesting early on may become disinteresting later. So like the biggest thing is just be open to change, basically. Like it will naturally happen during your PhD. Something will change over the course of time. So always be open to it. And so just to keep the ball rolling, we'll talk about housing. Anybody want to open up with that first while I look at the question?
Oh yeah, I could talk about it first. So honestly, if I have to talk about the income or the stipend that Cornell gives, It is quite competitive compared to a lot of other institutions, at least for myself. It was actually the largest offer I got out of the 3 programs I got accepted into. And considering like the standard of living or the median wage that you have at Ithaca, you actually make more than the median wage, which works in your favor. I probably spend more on housing than the average student. For me, that's not as big of a deal because I come from an expensive area like downstate New York, so the prices here are all still cheap to me. And I save money in different ways. Like I live by myself, I live in a nice apartment, but I like cook food for myself. So it kind of evens itself out compared to other people who may spend like half as what I do.
I can go next. So right now I live at Maplewood. I don't know if I don't know if you guys have heard of it already, but it's like this apartment complex that's not on campus, but it was developed like with help of Cornell or something like that. It's a while. So it's new. It's really new because it's like 3 years old, and it's really close to campus, so it's relatively more expensive. But now I live alone, so like I can do whatever I want. Don't have to worry about roommates. And it's fully furnished, everything's included, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like it balances out. That being said, I'm gonna move out like in the summer to move in with a friend at a townhouse, which is like half of it's like over half of the price of what I'm paying now. That's a whole townhouse with a friend. So yeah, it's like basically a balance. I still feel like Maplewood is like, for what you get, it's a pretty fair price, but it's still like you have to pay like more upfront of like, instead of paying for like the distance of where you're driving or for utilities, you're just paying it all in bulk on rent. But yeah, that's, I guess, one of the things you have to like balance with it. I feel like I don't have to struggle to pay for things, so it's going pretty well.
So I actually live pretty far outside of Ithaca. I live in Groton, New York, which is about a 20-minute drive outside of Ithaca. So if you're okay with driving, moving outside of Ithaca, it actually gets really, really cheap. Me and my wife actually bought a house, and so we have that. I know of actually 2 other people in my cohort who are buying houses right now outside of Ithaca as well. So it's actually quite doable to find really cheap housing just outside of Ithaca. It just depends on your comfort of driving or taking public transportation.
Yeah, and so sort of building on that, like I've lived in multiple neighborhoods here in Ithaca, and like our stipend covers us very comfortably with this. I would say the average price for a 2-bedroom is roughly $700 to $800 per month for rent, roughly. There are ranges, so like right now I pay $590 to give an idea of how big of a range it can be. But you can live very comfortably with our stipend. And on campus, there are on-campus housing options as well. I do not know who has actually used them yet, but there are plenty of options. But one of the options that a lot of people like to use for on-campus housing is doing what's known as the Graduate Resident Fellowship, GRF. I think that's what the R stands for.
Yeah, I think it's Graduate Resident Fellowship Program.
Yeah, where you stay in one of the houses. So Cornell has a house system for the undergrads and act as an RA/mentor to a lot of the undergrads. So there are plenty of BMEs that have gone through this process, which I can provide that offline if you're interested in it, but definitely after your first year would be a good time to think about doing that. But there are multiple options, but we can also talk about the different neighborhoods if needed, if curious, but it does seem.
About the question though, about mortgage, it does actually cover that quite well. Mortgage and my house is atypical in the kind of place that I decided to move to. I'm from a very rural place, so I really like that lifestyle. So I decided to move out into a country style home with acreage and that, and it's only $1,200 a month. So quite affordable on our stipend.
Yeah, and so to reiterate something that Belinda put in the chat and then move to the question as well. So your first year, you do have a free bus pass. So it's very useful, especially if you live downtown, because the 10 bus runs every 10 minutes, or depending on the day, every 5 even. And it goes directly from downtown to campus. So it's very, very convenient. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, Belinda, but even as students, we have the late night pass too after 6 p.m. that we all have. So after 6, we can ride the bus afterwards too. I know I've taken advantage of it a couple of times, but I had the bus pass that year too. So, but to also answer the question for resources to find housing and roommates, housing, it will sound weird, but Craigslist is actually really, really good at finding finding housing, especially in Ithaca. There are other websites, but one of the other things that I always say is that always ask us. If you can't visit, ask us to take a look as well. And sometimes we even have openings in our apartments too. So you have a big resource available in us too.
Yeah. If you ever want to like look at areas, we can go like take photos of it, kind of like see how the neighborhoods are. Cause I know neighborhoods changed quite drastically from day to night. Like in the day, a neighborhood might seem super quiet and calm, but after 6 p.m., suddenly it might be loud and noisy, or vice versa. So
Yeah, I think the bus pass is after 6 and before 5 a.m. maybe, and then weekends.
also the bus is great if you don't have a car and you just want to go visit like some of the small towns around Ithaca. The bus actually does go out to all the small towns, even all the way out to Groton where I live. So
Yeah, I saw that. Like sometimes when I've driven back home and have come to Ithaca, I see like the TCAT out at like Dryden or something. I'm like, oh wow, you're on here. Impressive.
Yeah, and so to sort of build upon that and what Jan just put in, if you don't have a car, it's fine in Ithaca. The bus system is really useful. It is very well extended. Like it takes you out to Wegmans and some of the grocery and shopping complexes out here. There's also the car share system that Jan just put in the chat, which is very, very useful. It's I think, monthly fee that allows you to do it. Yes, the Ithaca car share is what it's officially called.
Yeah.
And they have cars all over the place. Like next to my apartment, there's actually a truck that you can rent, basically. But there's also Priuses everywhere as well. They have multiple locations.
Yeah, I use it. And like you don't, if you have like a Cornell ID, you don't have to pay for the monthly fee. And there's like a Prius that's like right across the street, Maplewood. There's like one that's like a street down from Weil. And I don't use it super often, but if it's like something like, oh, I know I want to make like several stops, and if I take the bus, it's going to take me forever, and I have to carry everything, that it's pretty useful since I don't have a car.
Oh, and Belinda just put in about the Ithaca Farmers Market, which honestly, if you get a chance to go, 100% suggest it. It is amazing. It's fun. It's all local, and they always have great food there, seriously. And I always have a fun time when I go, so.
Yeah, I'll also talk about driving in Ithaca. If you guys are between, should I take the bus or the car? Honestly, the worst you'd ever have to worry about is like the winter with snow. And I've been incredibly impressed with how the city of Ithaca handles its snow. It's like very rarely undrivable. They're on top of it. They're always salting. I drive a rear wheel drive, and they handle it a lot better than where I grew up downstate. So yeah, also take that into consideration if you're worried about like driving in winter here.
Going off what Dom said, even all the country roads and stuff, they actually clear and salt all of those. So I've never had a problem driving in.
Sidewalks too. So you don't have to like walk twice through like snowbanks if you're like gonna walk to campus. So the bad thing is it doesn't give you an excuse to not go to lab because they clean everything up pretty well.